My card declined for the third time, and the cashier's eyes flicked up at me with that look, the one that says, she's already decided who I am before I've said a word. And behind me, in a grocery store line at 8 in the morning, I felt 37 years of proving myself collapse into a single humiliating beep. Welcome back to the Family Revenge Tales. I want to tell you something my father never understood about me, not once in his life. Not even on the day I stood in front of his entire board and watched his empire tremble because of a piece of paper he signed 8 years ago and never bothered to read. He thought power came from a title, from a name on a building, from being the man who signs the checks. I learned, the hard way, that real power is quiet. It waits. It doesn't announce itself. And on that freezing January morning in Charlotte, standing in a grocery store with a cart full of coffee and bottled water for my warehouse crew, I had no idea that my father's arrogance was about to hand me everything he'd spent his whole life trying to keep from me. My name is Madison Brooks. I spent 8 years in the United States Air Force as a logistics officer, which is a fancy way of saying I learned how to solve problems nobody else wanted to touch, how to move impossible amounts of cargo across impossible distances without anyone noticing how close we came to disaster. I loved that life. I was good at it, and I would probably still be doing it today if my father hadn't had a heart attack in his office on a Tuesday afternoon 8 years ago, while our family's freight company was drowning in debt and government penalties and a decade of decisions made by men who cared more about appearances than survival. I didn't come home for the company. I want to be honest about that. I came home because my father was lying in a hospital bed with tubes in his arms, and because 300 employees were about to lose their jobs, and because somebody had to hold the whole thing together while he recovered. I gave up my career I loved. I didn't ask for a title. I didn't ask for recognition. I just started fixing things, one broken piece at a time, until Brooks Freight Solutions was standing on its feet again. And when it finally was, when the contracts came back, when the warehouses filled, when the headlines started calling it a comeback story, my father stood in front of every camera and took every ounce of credit. I let him. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself the company surviving was the only thing that mattered. I was wrong about a lot of things back then. That was one of them. 2 years ago, my father married a woman named Elaine. I want to be fair to her, so let me just tell you what I observed, and you can decide for yourself. Elaine was polished in the way expensive things are polished. Every word chosen, every smile timed just right for whoever was watching. And she came with a son, Tyler, 30 years old, full of confidence he had never once earned. Tyler didn't know how to run a warehouse. He'd never negotiated a supplier contract in his life, but he knew exactly how to make my father feel important, how to tell him precisely what he wanted to hear. And within a year, Tyler was being groomed for a title he had no business holding, Executive Vice President. His big idea, the one he was so proud of, was to sell off several of our company-owned warehouses, lease them back at inflated rates, and pour the cash into technology investments that, when I actually read the fine print, were built on nothing but promises. I sat across from my father in his office and told him, as calmly as I could, that this deal would bankrupt us within 3 years. "You're too cautious, Madison," he said, not even looking up from his desk. "You always have been. Tyler sees the future. You just see risk." "I see numbers, Dad. The numbers don't lie." "Numbers didn't save this company. I did." I didn't argue that point. There wasn't much use in it. He looked at me like a stranger, like the 8 years I'd spent rebuilding what he'd nearly lost had somehow erased themselves from his memory. And 2 weeks later, on that January morning, he decided to teach me a lesson. The text came while I was still standing in the parking lot, my breath fogging in the cold, my hands still shaking a little from the humiliation of paying with my own debit card while strangers watched. Mr. Brooks ordered every executive company card assigned to you canceled, effective immediately. I read it twice. Then I called him. He answered on the second ring, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice before he even said a word. "I figured you'd call." "You canceled my cards in the middle of a grocery store, Dad, in front of people." "Maybe now you'll remember who's in charge of this company," he said. "You want to keep fighting me on Tyler's plan? Fine, but you'll do it without the privileges I gave you." "You didn't give me privileges, Dad. I earned them." He laughed, short and dismissive. "We'll see how far that gets you." I didn't argue further. I didn't raise my voice. I said, "Okay, Dad," and I hung up. And I sat in my SUV for a moment with the engine running, watching my breath fill the cold air, feeling something settle inside me that felt less like anger and more like clarity. Because my father had forgotten something, or maybe he had simply never understood it in the first place. 8 years ago, when the company was collapsing and the banks were circling and bankruptcy looked like the only road left, I did something my father never fully grasped the weight of. I personally guaranteed a $14 million emergency restructuring loan. I put up my own inheritance, my own assets, everything I had to keep Brooks Freight Solutions alive. My father was so desperate at the time, so certain the company was already dead, that he signed every document I put in front of him without reading the governance clauses buried in the fine print. He just wanted the money. He didn't care about the conditions attached to it. One of those conditions said that if I were ever removed from executive authority without proper board approval, the bank retained the legal right to suspend all executive financial control until leadership and ownership were formally reviewed. I drove straight to First National Commercial Bank in Uptown Charlotte. Daniel Whitmore, the senior banking executive who had walked me through that loan 8 years earlier, welcomed me into his office like he always did. Warm, unhurried, the kind of man who remembers details most people forget. I set the leather portfolio on his desk, the one that hadn't been opened in years, and I watched his expression shift as he read through the documents page by page. "Madison," he said slowly, "do you understand what you're asking me to do here?" "I'm not asking you to do anything, Daniel. I'm just showing you what he did to himself." He leaned back in his chair. "He canceled your cards. That's the trigger?" "He removed my executive authority without board approval. Read the clause again." Daniel read it a second time, quietly, his finger tracing the paragraph. Then he looked up at me, and I saw something close to disbelief in his face. He signed this without reading it. He signed a lot of things without reading them that year. He was drowning. I wasn't going to let him drown. And now? Now the agreement does exactly what it was written to do. Within minutes, the wheels were already turning. Executive spending authority suspended. Major corporate transactions frozen. Executive credit cards blocked. All of them, not just mine. High-value transfers paused. Nothing illegal, nothing manufactured, just an agreement, activating exactly as it had been written 8 years before. Quietly, the way real consequences often do. That afternoon, my father hosted a private luncheon in South Park to celebrate what he believed was Tyler's coming promotion. Elaine was there. Tyler was there. Investment partners, developers, respected names in Charlotte business circles all gathered to watch my father announce the future of the company. I wasn't there, but I heard about it later, in pieces, from people who were. He stood up, glass in hand, and told the room that exciting changes were coming to Brooks Freight Solutions. And when the check came, he reached for his card the way a man reaches for something he's never once doubted. Declined. He tried another. Declined. Elaine's card failed. Tyler's failed. And as the silence in that private dining room grew heavier, my father's phone began filling with urgent alerts from the bank, one after another, each one confirming what he refused to believe was happening. I'm told the room didn't say much. I'm told nobody laughed. I'm told my father just sat there, staring at his phone, while the polished veneer of everything he thought he controlled quietly cracked in front of the people he most wanted to impress. He called an emergency board meeting the next morning. He was convinced I had sabotaged him. He wanted me removed, officially, immediately, and Tyler installed in my place before anyone could ask too many questions. I walked into that boardroom exactly on time. I wasn't alone. Daniel Whitmore walked beside me. So did Rebecca Lawson, our corporate attorney, and an independent financial auditor I'd asked to review everything in advance, so there would be no doubt, no room for argument, nothing left to interpretation. My father stood up the moment I walked in. "This is your doing," he said, his voice sharp enough to cut. "You've attacked this company." "I haven't attacked anything, Dad. I've protected it, same as I have for 8 years. You froze our accounts." "No," I said, setting my binder down on the table. "You froze them. I just showed the bank what you'd done." The room went still. I opened the binder in front of me and let the numbers speak instead of my emotions. I walked the board through the debt we inherited 8 years ago, the restructuring, the loan I personally guaranteed, the years of rebuilding supplier trust one relationship at a time, the jobs protected, the obligations honored, every single one of them, on time, without exception. "This is a family matter," my father said, looking around the table, "not a boardroom matter." Rebecca placed the governance agreement on the table, the one my father had signed without reading. "With respect, Mr. Brooks, you made it a boardroom matter the moment you signed this." Every signature belonged to him. The auditor confirmed everything was valid, and as the board members read through the clauses themselves, I watched the truth settle over each of their faces one at a time, that my father, in trying to strip away my authority without following the very rules he'd agreed to, had automatically transferred the operational control to me. He hadn't defeated me with those canceled cards. He had handed me the company. The board voted unanimously to appoint me acting chief executive officer while the investigation proceeded. My father didn't say anything. I don't think he had anything left to say. I want you to understand something about what happened next, because I know some of you are hoping I tore the family apart out of spite. I didn't. I couldn't. Whatever he'd done to me, he was still my father, and I had spent 8 years of my life trying to save something worth saving. I wasn't going to burn it down just because I finally could. Tyler was removed from his executive responsibilities. Not out of cruelty, simply because he lacked the qualifications the role required, and everyone in that room, including him, quietly knew it. Elaine lost her company privileges, her membership accounts, the vehicle that had been provided to her. My father was placed on administrative leave while a forensic audit reviewed years of executive spending and governance decisions. He came to my office about a week later. I remember he looked smaller somehow, standing in the doorway, the confidence that had defined him my whole life noticeably absent. "I read the loan documents again last night," he said quietly. "All of them. I don't think I ever really read them the first time." "I know," I said. "You saved this company, Madison, and I let everyone believe it was me." I didn't say anything right away. I let the silence sit there between us, because some apologies don't need to be filled in immediately. "I wanted Tyler to feel like part of something," he finally said. "I think I was trying to prove I still had control of my own life. After the heart attack, I felt like everyone was managing me. I didn't want to admit that included you." "I wasn't managing you, Dad. I was protecting you. There's a difference." "I know that now." I didn't do any of this for the credit, I told him. I did it because I couldn't watch you lose everything you built. I just wish, one time, you had trusted me because you believed in me, not because a piece of paper forced your hand. He didn't have an answer for that. I don't think there was one. 6 months later, Brooks Freight Solutions is stronger than it has ever been. We've expanded into 3 additional states, employee satisfaction is at a record high, new transportation contracts have increased revenue in ways I honestly didn't expect this quickly. We were recognized this spring as one of the fastest growing logistics companies in the Southeast, and every single time a reporter asks me about it, I make sure the story includes the warehouse crews, the drivers, the dispatchers, the people who actually built this, not just the name on the door. My father retired quietly. Elaine left not long after, once it became clear the life she'd married into no longer came with the privileges she valued. Tyler tried starting another venture on his own this time, without the company behind him, and it folded within a few months. I didn't celebrate any of it. I genuinely didn't. I just kept building something employees could be proud of, because that had always mattered more to me than winning. Last week, I found myself back in that same grocery store, the one where all of this began. I picked up coffee, breakfast, a few things for the week, and when I reached the register, I paid with my own personal card, the same one that had saved me from embarrassment that January morning. Not because I had to. I could have used a company card if I wanted to. I used my own because somewhere over these past 6 months, I stopped measuring my worth by what privileges I was given and started measuring it by what I had actually earned. Leadership was never going to come from a family name or a corner office. It never does. It comes from sacrifice, from showing up when things are falling apart, from telling the truth even when it costs you the room's approval. My father spent his whole life believing that control meant holding the checkbook. I learned that real control means being the person everyone can depend on when the checkbook is empty. The greatest victory in this entire story wasn't taking over that boardroom. It was proving, once and for all, that the kind of leadership built on integrity can never be canceled with the swipe of the card. If this story moved you even a little, I'd love for you to stay with us here at the Family Revenge Tales. We tell stories about the families we come from, the battles we don't talk about at the dinner table, and the quiet strength it takes to stand up for yourself when the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally try to make you smaller than you are. If Madison's story reminded you of your own fight, hit subscribe so you never miss the next one. And if there's one thing I hope you carry with you today, let it be this. Your worth was never something someone else could take away with a decision, a signature, or a canceled card. The people who try to shrink you usually do it because somewhere, quietly, they already know how much bigger you truly are. What makes this story matter beyond its drama is the honest reminder it offers about earned versus inherited authority, and how easily families mistake control for respect. It shows the real cost of favoritism, how quietly it can erode trust between a parent and a child who has sacrificed the most and asked for the least. It teaches that true justice doesn't require revenge or cruelty, only patience, documentation, and the courage to let the truth speak for itself. And, perhaps most importantly, it reminds us that protecting people, employees, family, anyone depending on us, often matters far more than protecting our pride, and that the people who quietly hold everything together are usually the ones a family notices last and needs most.